in the dust-choked landscapes of the Old West, where justice was often a matter of who drew fastest. Some battles were fought not with bullets but with quiet observation and an unshakable will. This is the story of a man who owned 1,000 acres of land but spoke fewer than 100 words a day. He was a simple rancher, a man of routine and solitude, but when he saw his maid, a girl with tired eyes and a spirit tougher than saddle leather, trying to hide a painful limp, he saw something more than an accident. What he did next wasn't loud, it wasn't violent, but it sent a tremor through his quiet life and shook the very foundations of the local sheriff's office, proving that the most dangerous man isn't the one who shouts, but the one who watches, waits, and uncovers a truth everyone else wants to bury. Jedediah Jed Stone was a man carved from the very rock and dust of the Wyoming Territory. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was a roadmap of long days and hard seasons. His eyes the color of a stormy sky. Missed nothing, a trait that served him well in a land where danger could appear as suddenly as a rattler in a woodpile. Stone Creek Ranch was his kingdom, a sprawling expanse of grassland and rolling hills that stretched as far as the eye could see, a legacy left to him by a father who had been as hard and unyielding as the land itself. Jed was a man of few words, his voice a low rumble rarely heard over the whistle of the wind or the lowing of his cattle. His silence was often mistaken for aloofness, but it was in reality a deep-seated habit of observation. He watched his herd, the subtle shifts in the seasons, and for the past year he had watched Clara May. Clara was a wisp of a thing, barely 20, with hair the color of sun-bleached straw and eyes that held a history too old for her years. She had arrived at his ranch seeking work, any work her hands calloused, and her meager belongings tied in a faded shawl. Jed, who had managed the sprawling ranch house on his own since his mother's passing, had seen the desperation and a flicker of resilient strength in her gaze. He'd hired her on the spot. She was a tireless worker, her days a blur of scrubbing floors, mending clothes, preparing meals, and tending the small garden behind the house. Her presence had brought a semblance of order and a quiet warmth to the cavernous, lonely rooms of the ranch house, a change Jedediah wouldn't admit he desperately needed. She was as quiet as he was, their days punctuated by the necessities of work, their conversations brief and to the point. An unspoken understanding existed between them, a shared appreciation for the peace that silence could offer. It was a Tuesday, under the unforgiving glare of the midday sun, that Jed first noticed it. He was returning to the house for lunch, a routine as ingrained in him as the rising of the sun. As he approached the back porch, he saw Clara carrying a heavy basket of wet laundry towards the clothesline. It was the hitch in her step that caught his eye. A slight, almost imperceptible limp in her left leg. She tried to mask it, her back straight and her chin held high, but the strain was evident in the tight line of her jaw and the way she favored her right side. Jed paused by the water pump, his gaze narrowed. He watched her make 2 more trips from the wash basin to the line, each step a carefully controlled movement of pain. It wasn't the limp of a simple stumble. It was deeper, more persistent, the kind of hurt that gnawed at a person from the inside out. He said nothing during lunch. He ate the stew and cornbread she placed before him, his mind a churn of silent questions. He thought back over the past few days. Had she mentioned an accident? A fall? He was certain she hadn't. Clara wasn't one for complaining, but an injury that caused a limp, like that, was more than a minor mishap. When she returned to clear his plate, he watched her move across the wooden floor. She was a phantom of efficiency, but the limp was still there. A discordant note in the quiet symphony of their shared existence. A knot of unease tightened in his gut. It was a feeling he knew well, the same feeling he got when a coyote circled his herd, silent and unseen. Something was wrong. The silence in his house, once a comfort, now felt heavy-laden with an unspoken secret, and Jedediah Stone, the quiet rancher, knew he could not let it rest. His world was one of order and predictability, and this small, painful detail was a stone tossed into the placid water of his life, the ripples already beginning to spread. Later that afternoon, as the shadows began to lengthen across the dusty yard, Jed found Clara in the kitchen, meticulously polishing his late mother's silver. The rhythmic motion of her hand seemed mechanical, a way to occupy herself against a thought or a pain that was clearly plaguing her. The air was thick with the scent of polish and an unspoken tension. Jed leaned against the doorframe, his large frame filling the space. His presence alone a question. Clara May. He began, his voice raspy from disuse. She started a flicker of something akin to panic in her eyes before it was quickly suppressed. She turned to him, forcing a small, tight smile. "Yes, Mr. Stone." "Your leg," he stated simply, his gaze dropping to it for a brief moment. "You're hurt." The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and fragile under the harsh kitchen light. "It's nothing, sir. Truly. I was clumsy. Tripped on the porch steps yesterday evening. It'll be fine in a day or two." Her words came out in a rush, a little too quickly, a little too rehearsed. She avoided his eyes, her focus returning to the silver teapot in her hands, polishing a spot that was already gleaming. Jedediah didn't move. He had seen fear in the eyes of cornered animals, and he saw it now in hers. It wasn't the simple embarrassment of a clumsy fall. It was a deep, chilling fear. A fall from the porch steps. He repeated his tone flat, betraying no emotion. Yet his mind was racing. He knew every creak and groan of those steps. A fall bad enough to cause a limp like that would have made a racket, a sound he would have surely heard from his study. He'd been reading late last night, the house as silent as a tomb. "Yes, sir," she whispered, her knuckles white as she gripped the teapot. I didn't want to bother you with it." "You're a poor liar, Clara May," he said, not with cruelty, but with a quiet finality. The statement hung in the air between them, irrefutable. Her shoulders slumped in defeat, but she offered no confession. The wall of her silence was absolute, fortified by a fear that was stronger than his questioning. Jedediah knew he would get no more from her. Not now. Her fear was a living thing in the room, and it wasn't him she was afraid of. The next morning, Jed saddled his horse, a powerful buckskin named Dust Devil. His jaw was set with a grim determination. If Clara wouldn't talk, he would find someone who would. His destination was the town of Redemption Gulch, a dusty collection of wooden storefronts and false-fronted saloons that served the surrounding ranches and mining camps. It was a town that held its secrets close, but Jedediah was patient. He tied Dust Devil to the hitching post outside the sheriff's office, the wood worn smooth by countless rains. The office was a small, cramped building that smelled of stale coffee, cheap cigars, and the faint metallic scent of the holding cells in the back. Sheriff Thomas Brody was a man in his late 50s, with a florid face and a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform vest. He was a man who preferred the path of least resistance, a philosophy that had served his political ambitions better than it served actual justice. Jedediah Brody said, looking up from a pile of paperwork, a feigned warmth in his voice. "What brings you down from that mountain of yours? Don't tell me you've finally decided to join civilized society." Jed ignored the jibe. He removed his hat, a gesture of respect that was more habit than heartfelt. "I've a concern, Sheriff." Brody leaned back in his chair, the wood groaning in protest. "A concern? Cattle rustlers, claim jumpers." "It's about my maid," Jed said, his voice low and steady. "Clara May. She's come up with a bad limp. Says she fell. I don't believe her." The sheriff listened, his expression shifting from mild interest to outright dismissal. He picked up a pen and began tapping it on his desk, an impatient rhythm that set Jed's teeth on edge. "A maid with a limp." Brody sighed as if the very words were an imposition. "Jed folks fall down. It happens. Women folk are prone to it. She's probably just embarrassed and doesn't want to fuss. She's scared, Tom." Jed insisted, his gaze unwavering. There's a look in her eye. I want you to ride out. Ask her some questions yourself. Officially. Brody let out a short, humorless laugh. Ride all the way out to your ranch to ask a girl why she tripped. I'm the sheriff of Redemption Gulch, not a nursemaid. I've got actual crimes to worry about. There was a brawl at the saloon last night, and Silas Croft is complaining about vagrants loitering near his mercantile again. My hands are full. He gestured to the pile of papers on his desk, as if it were a mountain of evidence of his importance. Look, Jed, if the girl is being abused, she can come to me herself. Until she does, it's just your word that she's lying about a fall. My advice, forget about it. It's likely nothing more than a bruised shin and a bruised ego. Jedediah stood there for a long moment, his stony silence a stark contrast to Brody's blustering dismissal. He saw it then clear as day. The sheriff wasn't just dismissive, he was actively unwilling to help. It wasn't just about being busy. He didn't want to look. He didn't want to know. A cold anger, slow and deliberate, began to burn in Jed's chest. He had come to the law for help and had been met with a locked door. He placed his hat back on his head, the shadow from its brim obscuring his eyes. I see, he said, the two words carrying more weight than Brody's entire speech. He turned without another word and walked out of the office, the bell above the door giving a mocking jingle. As he mounted Dust Devil, he knew one thing for certain. He was on his own. And if the law in Redemption Gulch wouldn't uncover the truth, he would have to dig it up himself. The ride back to Stone Creek Ranch was long and contemplative. The vast open country, usually a source of comfort, for Jedediah felt isolating. Sheriff Brody's dismissal had not deterred him. It had galvanized him. It confirmed his suspicion that something was being deliberately ignored, a rot that went deeper than a young woman's mysterious injury. He was no longer just a concerned employer. He was a man with a purpose, a quiet force moving against a current of willful ignorance. He arrived back at the ranch as dusk was settling, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Clara had left a plate of food for him on the kitchen table, covered with a cloth. He ate in silence, his mind working through the problem. He couldn't force the truth from her. Her fear was a shield he could not and would not break with force. He had to find another way. The truth, he reasoned, often left traces, small, forgotten things that could speak for the silent. He would have to search her room. The thought sat uneasily with him. It was a violation of her privacy, a breach of the trust that had existed between them. But the image of her frightened eyes and the sound of Brody's condescending laughter pushed him forward. This was no longer just about a limp. It was about protecting someone who was clearly unable to protect herself. He waited until he was sure Clara was asleep. The house was submerged in the profound silence of the prairie night, the only sound the distant cry of a lone coyote. He lit a small oil lamp, its flickering light casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, and made his way to the back of the house where the servants' quarters were located. Clara's room was small and sparse, more of a cell than a bedroom. A narrow cot, a small wooden dresser, and a single chair were its only furnishings. Everything was meticulously neat, a testament to her orderly nature. A worn Bible lay on the nightstand next to a half-burnt candle. The air smelled faintly of lavender and soap. Jed began his search with a heavy heart, his large hands moving with a surgeon's care. He felt like a trespasser, a clumsy bull in a fragile world. He looked under the cot, finding nothing but a dust bunny and a lost button. He checked the pockets of the two simple dresses hanging from a peg on the wall. Nothing. He moved to the dresser, his fingers hesitating over the wooden knobs. He opened the top drawer. It contained her personal effects, a small brush, a ribbon, a few folded handkerchiefs. It felt profoundly wrong to be sifting through these meager treasures. He was about to close the drawer when his fingers brushed against something hard and uneven, tucked beneath a stack of neatly folded undergarments. He carefully pulled it out. It was a small drawstring pouch made of cheap muslin. It was empty, but it was the pouch itself that held his attention. In the corner, a small logo had been stamped in black ink, a stylized letter C, entwined with a depiction of a grain sheaf. It was the mark of Croft's Mercantile, the largest and most successful store in Redemption Gulch, owned by the very man Sheriff Brody had mentioned, Silas Croft. Jed's brows furrowed. Croft's was expensive. Clara was paid a fair wage, but she was frugal, sending most of her money back to a family he knew nothing about. It was unlikely she would shop for simple goods there when the general store offered much cheaper prices. He turned the pouch over in his hand. Then he saw it, a dark reddish-brown stain near the drawstring, almost lost in the coarse fabric. He brought it closer to the lamplight. It was faint but unmistakable. Blood. His heart hammered in his chest. A fall on the porch steps. That's what she had said. Why would a pouch from Croft's Mercantile stained with blood be hidden in her drawer? The two things were utterly disconnected. This was not a trace of a simple accident. This was evidence, a piece of a puzzle he was only just beginning to see. He carefully placed the pouch back where he had found it, tucking it under the garments exactly as it had been. He didn't want Clara to know he had been there. Not yet. He closed the drawer softly and backed out of the room, his mind alight with new questions. Silas Croft. The name echoed in the silence. The wealthy merchant Brody had seemed so eager to appease, a man whose name was now tied by a single blood-stained thread to the fear in Clara's eyes and the pain in her leg. The quiet rancher now had a name, a direction. His investigation had just begun. The following day, Jedediah rode back into Redemption Gulch, but this time his purpose was different. He wasn't seeking the blunt instrument of the law. He was in search of the subtler, sharper tool of information. He knew that in a town like this, gossip was a currency more valuable than gold, and whispers in the right places could reveal more than a sheriff's interrogation ever would. He left Dust Devil at the livery stable, deciding that walking would make him less conspicuous, allowing him to blend in and listen. His first stop was not Croft's Mercantile. That would be too direct, too obvious. Instead, he went to the general store, a cluttered and friendly place run by a balding, portly man named Earl. Jed bought a sack of flour and some coffee items he didn't strictly need as an excuse to linger. As Earl weighed out the coffee beans, Jed leaned against the counter, affecting a casual air that felt foreign to him. "Seems quiet in town today." "Earl," Jed remarked, his voice a low rumble. Earl scoffed, wiping his hands on his apron. "Quiet for you, maybe. For me, it's been nothing but Silas Croft this morning. Came in here complaining that my prices for canvas were undercutting his. As if he doesn't own half the town already." Jed feigned mild interest. "He's a man who likes to have his way." "That's putting it mildly," Earl said, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "He treats this town like his own personal fiefdom. Thinks his money gives him the right to do whatever he pleases. And with Sheriff Brody in his pocket, who's to say he's wrong?" This confirmed Jed's own assessment of the sheriff. "Brody seems accommodating to Mr. Croft," Jed probed gently. "Accommodating?" Earl chuckled without humor. "Brody jumps when Croft says frog. Always has. Croft financed half of Brody's last campaign. Bought and paid for, that's our sheriff." Jed tucked this piece of information away. It painted a clearer picture of the power dynamics in Redemption Gulch. His next stop was the blacksmith's forge at the edge of town. Ben Carter the blacksmith was a bear of a man with soot-stained skin and arms like tree trunks. He was an honest man, not prone to idle gossip, but he saw and heard a great deal from his open-air forge. Jed commissioned a new set of hinges for a corral gate, and as Ben heated the iron, Jed steered the conversation. "I saw one of Croft's delivery wagons heading out of town yesterday," Jed said, watching the glowing metal on the anvil. "Seemed to be in a hurry." Ben grunted his hammer, striking the iron in a deafening rhythm. "Croft's boys are always in a hurry. He works them to the bone for pennies on the dollar, treats his horses better than his men." He paused, dunking the hot iron into a barrel of water, which hissed and steamed violently. Heard he had to let one of his newer stable hands go last week. Young fellow, said the boy was clumsy spooked one of his prize mares. Jed's interest piqued. A new stable hand, aye. Name of Billy Pritchard. Seemed like a decent kid just trying to earn a wage. Croft gave him the boot, with nothing to show for it. The boy was pretty cut up about it. Saw him over at the saloon, drowning his sorrows a couple of nights ago. A dismissed employee, a potential source of unfiltered information. The third and final stop for the day was the one Jed dreaded most, the saloon. The Golden Spur was a rowdy, smoke-filled establishment, a place Jed typically avoided. He pushed through the batwing doors, the noise of a tinny piano and loud laughter washing over him. He ordered a whiskey at the bar and stood in the corner, nursing the drink and scanning the room. It didn't take him long to spot Billy Pritchard. He was a young man, no older than Clara, with a slumped posture and the resentful, hollowed-out look of someone who had been dealt a bad hand. He was sitting alone at a small table, staring into an empty glass. Jed walked over his boots, sounding heavy on the wooden floor. "Billy Pritchard?" Jed asked. The young man looked up, his eyes wary. "Who's asking?" "My name is Jedediah Stone. I own the ranch out at Stone Creek." Jed said, his tone even and non-threatening. "Mind if I sit? I'll buy you a drink." Billy shrugged, gesturing to the empty chair. Jed sat and signaled the bartender. When a fresh whiskey was placed in front of Billy, he downed half of it in one gulp. "Heard you used to work for Silas Croft." Jed began getting straight to the point. Billy's face soured. "Yeah, well, that didn't last long. The man's a tyrant. Thinks he's a king. I heard you were let go because you were clumsy with the horses." Billy slammed his glass down on the table, drawing a few annoyed looks. "That's a lie. I'm good with horses. Always have been. He fired me because I saw something I wasn't supposed to see." Jed leaned forward slightly, his quiet intensity commanding the young man's attention. "What did you see?" "Billy." Billy hesitated, looking around the saloon, nervously. He lowered his voice to a hoarse whisper. "It was a few nights ago. I was finishing up late in the stables behind the mercantile. I saw him, Mr. Croft, with a girl. She was crying. They were arguing out by the back loading dock. I couldn't hear everything, but I heard him call her ungrateful. He grabbed her arm hard. She tried to pull away, and that's when she tripped, or he pushed her. She fell hard against a stack of wooden crates." Jed's blood ran cold. What did this girl look like, young? Blonde hair, kind of pale. Wore a simple dress. I'd seen her in town before, but never spoken to her. After she fell, she started crying harder, holding her leg. Croft. He just looked down at her, his face like thunder. He saw me watching from the stable door. The next morning, he told me I was fired. Said I was a clumsy oaf who couldn't be trusted around his valuable animals. Jedediah placed a few coins on the table, more than enough to cover the drinks. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. The girl was Clara. The location was behind Croft's mercantile. The event was not a simple fall. It was an assault. "Thank you, Billy," Jed said, his voice grave. "You've been a great help." As Jed stood up to leave, Billy looked at him with a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Are you going to do something, the sheriff? He won't listen to a word against Croft." Jedediah looked down at the young man, a silent promise passing between them. He didn't need to speak. His expression said it all. He walked out of the saloon and into the harsh light of day, the noise and smoke falling away behind him. He now had more than just a blood-stained pouch. He had a witness, and his next visit would be to the sheriff, but this time he wouldn't be so easily dismissed. The knowledge Jedediah now possessed settled in his gut like a lead weight. The incident wasn't just an assault. It was an act of brutal dominance by a powerful man over a vulnerable young woman, followed by a calculated cover-up that involved threats, lies, and the casual ruin of a young man's livelihood. The connection between Clara's injury and Silas Croft was no longer a suspicion. It was a near certainty corroborated by a witness. And Sheriff Brody's dismissal was no longer just laziness, it reeked of complicity. Jed didn't ride directly to the sheriff's office. He needed to think, to assemble his facts into an argument so solid that not even a compromised lawman could knock it down. He walked Dust Devil slowly down the main street, his mind a whirlwind of strategy. He replayed Billy Pritchard's testimony, every detail, the argument that shoved Clara's fall against the crates, Croft's face like thunder, the immediate firing of the only witness. He connected it to the blood-stained pouch from Croft's mercantile, hidden in Clara's drawer, a token from her tormentor perhaps, or a simple bag she'd had with her that night, stained in the fall. He finally hitched his horse in front of the familiar building and pushed the door open. The jingle of the bell sounded less mocking this time, more like a summons. Sheriff Brody was at his desk just as before, but this time he wasn't alone. Silas Croft himself was there, leaning against the desk, dressed in a finely tailored suit that was a stark contrast to the dusty, worn-out clothes of everyone else in town. Croft was a man in his prime, with a sharp, handsome face, meticulously groomed hair, and cold, calculating eyes. He exuded an aura of wealth and untouchable authority. Upon seeing Jed Croft's polite smile, didn't quite reach his eyes. "Ah, Mr. Stonecroft," said smoothly, his voice cultured and calm. "Come to report on some wayward cattle. The sheriff and I were just discussing the importance of maintaining order in our fine community." Sheriff Brody shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his face a little paler than usual. "Jed, I thought I made myself clear yesterday. We're busy here." Jed ignored them both for a moment, his gaze sweeping the room before landing squarely on Brody. He let the silence stretch, a tactic he knew unnerved men who relied on bluster and bravado. "I'm here to follow up on my concern." "Sheriff Jed," said his voice dangerously quiet, "the one you were too busy to investigate. I have new information." Croft chuckled a condescending sound. "New information about your maid's supposed fall. Really, Stone? Don't you have a ranch to run? Some of us have important matters to attend to." Jed's eyes shifted to Croft, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "This supposed fall happened behind your mercantile? 2 nights ago, Mr. Croft. There was an argument. A young woman was pushed. She injured her leg when she fell against a stack of crates." The smile vanished from Croft's face. A flicker of something surprised anger crossed his features before being replaced by a mask of cool indignation. Sheriff Brody shot up from his chair. "Now hold on a minute, Jed." Brody blustered, his face turning red. "These are serious accusations. You can't just come in here and slander a respected member of the community like Mr. Croft." "I have a witness," Sheriff Jed stated flatly. "A young man named Billy Pritchard." The stable hand Croft fired the very next morning to ensure his silence. At the mention of Pritchard's name, Croft's composure cracked for a second time. He shot a venomous glare at Brody, a look that clearly said, "You were supposed to handle this." The glance was fleeting, but Jed saw it. It was the look of a master chastising a failing subordinate. "Billy Pritchard is a disgruntled ex-employee," Croft spat, regaining his voice. "A clumsy fool I had to dismiss for incompetence. He's a drunkard who would say anything for the price of a bottle. His word is worthless." "His word corroborates the evidence," Jed pressed on his gaze, still locked on Brody. "It explains the injury my maid tried to hide. It explains the fear in her eyes. It explains why you, he pointed a finger at the sheriff, "were so quick to dismiss me yesterday. You weren't just being lazy, were you, Tom? You were following orders." "That's enough," Brody roared, slamming his hand on the desk. "You're treading on dangerous ground, Stone. I won't have you making these wild, unsubstantiated claims in my office. Get out, and if you bother Mr. Croft again, I'll have you thrown in a cell for harassment." The threat hung in the air, hollow and desperate. Jedediah looked from Brody's sweating, panicked face to Croft's cold, murderous glare. He saw the truth of the situation laid bare. This wasn't just about Croft's influence. It was a deeper, more personal form of control. Brody wasn't just bought, he was owned. Why else would a sheriff so blatantly protect a man accused of assault and actively threaten the person reporting the crime? Jedediah gave a slow, deliberate nod. He had expected the denial, the threats. But the raw panic in Brody's eyes and the silent, furious exchange between the two men told him more than a confession would have. He had struck a nerve, a deep and rotten one. "I'll leave," Jed said, his voice calm. "For now. But this isn't over. A man like you, Croft, you may think you can buy the law, but you can't buy the truth. It has a way of coming out." He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the two men in a thick, charged silence. As he stepped back into the sunlight, he knew his investigation had entered a new, more dangerous phase. He had exposed their connection, but in doing so, he had made himself a target. He now needed more than a witness's testimony. He needed something undeniable, something that would shatter the shield of power that Silas Croft and his puppet sheriff had built around themselves. The ride home was charged with a new kind of energy. The confrontation had confirmed the conspiracy, but it had also raised the stakes immeasurably. Jedediah was no longer just an investigator. He was an adversary to the most powerful man in the county. Croft and Brody would not sit idly by. They would move to discredit him, to silence Billy Pritchard, and to ensure Clara May never spoke a word. Jed knew he was in a race against time. He thought of Billy alone and vulnerable in the saloon. The first thing he had to do was protect his witness. After checking on Clara, who gave him a wide-eyed, fearful look but asked no questions, Jed rode back towards town, but not into it. He circled around to the shabbier outskirts, where he knew some of the transient workers lived in small shacks. He found Billy Pritchard packing a small, pathetic bundle of belongings. Leaving town, Jed asked, dismounting. Billy jumped, his eyes wide with fear. "Mr. Stone, I have to. Sheriff Brody paid me a visit after you left the saloon. He told me to get out of Redemption Gulch and never come back. He said if I was seen here again, he'd arrest me for vagrancy and I'd rot in his jail. He gave me $20. Billy's voice trembled with a mixture of fear and shame. "He's trying to bury the truth." "Billy," Jed said, his voice firm, "but running won't make you safe. A man like Croft has a long reach. I have a proposition for you. Come back to my ranch. I'll give you a job, a place to stay. You'll be safe there, and you'll be there when the time comes to tell your story to someone who will listen." Billy looked at the powerful, quiet man before him, a stark contrast to the blustering sheriff and the venomous merchant. He saw an offer not just of safety, but of dignity. He nodded, his eyes welling with relief. Thank you, Mr. Stone. Thank you." With his witness secured, Jed turned his attention to the next more difficult task, finding irrefutable evidence. Billy's testimony was powerful, but it was still one man's word against another's. He needed something physical, something that tied Croft directly to the assault. He thought about the scene Billy had described, the loading dock behind the mercantile, the stack of crates. An idea began to form, a long shot, but the only one he had. The following night, under the sliver of a crescent moon, Jedediah rode not his sturdy dust devil, but a dark, quiet mare from his stock. He tethered her in a grove of cottonwood trees, a good distance from town, and made his way towards the back of Croft's mercantile on foot, moving through the shadows like a ghost. The town was asleep, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a wolf. The back of the mercantile was a mess of crates, barrels, and discarded refuse. A single lantern, its flame turned low, cast a weak, flickering light over the loading dock. Jed surveyed the scene, his eyes slowly adjusting to the gloom. He saw the spot Billy had described, a tall stack of wooden crates near the edge of the dock. This was where Clara had fallen. He began his search, his movements slow and methodical. He was looking for something small, something that could have been dropped or broken in a struggle. He ran his hands over the rough wooden planks of the dock, his fingers probing the cracks. He sifted through the dirt and gravel below. He found nails, bottle caps, splinters of wood, but nothing of consequence. An hour passed. A cold frustration began to set in. Perhaps he was wrong. Perhaps there was nothing here to find. He was about to give up when his eyes caught a tiny glint of light from beneath the loading dock, almost completely obscured by a thick, overgrown weed. He knelt down, pulling the weed aside. There, half buried in the dirt, was a small metallic object. He picked it up and brushed it clean. It was a cufflink. It wasn't the simple, functional type that most men in the territory wore. This was ornate, made of polished silver, and inlaid with a small, dark stone onyx, he guessed. In the center of the onyx was a single, elegantly carved initial, Sul. Jed's breath caught in his throat. It was the kind of expensive accessory a man like Silas Croft would wear. A man who, in a moment of violent anger, might not notice a small piece of jewelry breaking loose as he grabbed and shoved a young woman. He remembered Croft in the sheriff's office, the finely tailored suit, the air of vanity. This cufflink was a piece of him dropped at the scene of the crime. But was it enough? Croft could claim he lost it any time. Jed needed to connect it directly to the event. He looked back at the stack of crates. They were rough-hewn, held together with thick iron nails. An idea, sharp and clear, cut through his mind. He examined the crates more closely, running his hand along the edges where Clara would have fallen. And then he found it. Embedded in the soft wood of one of the crates at about waist height was a tiny snag of dark fabric. It was a minuscule thread, almost invisible in the dim light, but it was there. It was from a fine wool, the kind used in expensive suits, not the homespun cotton of Clara's dress, or the rough denim of a stable hand's trousers. Jedediah carefully worked the thread loose with the tip of his knife, his heart pounding with a hunter's thrill. He held the two pieces of evidence in the palm of his hand, the silver cufflink with the initial C and the dark thread from a rich man's suit. On their own they were circumstantial, but together they told a story. They placed a man in a fine suit, a man with the initial C at this very spot in a physical struggle, violent enough to snag his clothing and break his cufflink. He had it, the damning physical proof. He carefully wrapped the cufflink and the thread in his handkerchief and slipped them into his pocket. He had underestimated Silas Croft's arrogance. A man that meticulous about his appearance would surely have noticed a missing cufflink. He would have a matching one. All Jed had to do now was force a situation where Croft would have to show his hand. His quiet investigation was over. The time for confrontation was at hand. Jedediah did not ride to the sheriff's office. He knew that presenting the evidence to Brody would be useless. The sheriff would find a way to lose it, to discredit it, to bury it under a mountain of paperwork and feigned incompetence. No, the evidence was not for the lawman. It was for the man the lawman protected. Jed needed to confront Silas Croft directly to rattle the cage and see what fell out. He also knew he couldn't do it alone. The final piece of his plan required the one person whose voice mattered most, Clara May. He found her in the garden, listlessly pulling weeds. The fear had not left her eyes, but it was now mingled with a deep, weary sadness. Jed approached her, slowly holding out his hand. In his palm lay the silver and onyx cufflink. "I believe this belongs to the man who hurt you," he said, his voice gentle but firm. Clara stared at the cufflink, and a shudder ran through her entire body. Her face went ashen. It was a look of pure recognition and terror. She took a half step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Clara, Jed continued his gaze, holding hers. "I know what happened. I know it was Silas Croft. I know he pushed you. I have a witness, and I have this." He gestured to the cufflink. "But it's not enough. Your fear gives him his power. As long as you are silent, he wins. I can stand up to him, but I cannot speak for you. Your truth in your own words is the one thing he cannot fight." Tears welled in her eyes and began to stream down her pale cheeks. "He'll kill me," she whispered, her voice cracking. He said if I ever told anyone, he would find me and my family. He knows where they live. He said he would ruin them, that he would see them starve. This was the root of her terror, the reason for her unyielding silence. It wasn't just her own safety she was protecting. Jed's heart ached for her, for the terrible burden she had been forced to carry. He is a bully and a coward, Clara, Jed said, his voice imbued with a quiet, unshakable certainty. His threats are the only weapons he has left. We will not let him win. I will not let him harm you or your family. I give you my word. But you have to be brave, just for a little while longer. Will you come with me? Will you face him? He saw the war in her eyes, the deep-seated terror battling a tiny flickering flame of hope. She looked at Jedediah, at his strong, weathered face and his steady, honest eyes. He was the only person who had looked past her silence and seen her pain. He was the only one who had cared enough to seek the truth. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, she nodded. A single decisive movement. The flame of hope had won. Jed's plan was audacious and risky. He and Clara rode into Redemption Gulch in the middle of the day, but they didn't go to the sheriff's office. They went directly to Croft's Mercantile. Jed tied their horses to the hitching post, and they walked up the steps, the bell above the door announcing their arrival. The Mercantile was busy. Customers milled about, browsed the shelves laden with everything from canned peaches to ammunition. Silas Croft was standing behind the main counter, overseeing a transaction with the condescending air of a king surveying his subjects. When he saw Jedediah Stone walk in, his face hardened. But when he saw Clara May standing beside him, her chin held high despite the fear in her eyes, his face contorted into a mask of pure fury. "What is the meaning of this?" Croft hissed, his voice low and venomous, so as not to alarm his customers. "Get her out of my store." Jedediah walked calmly to the counter. He placed the ornate cufflink on the polished wood. "I believe you're missing something, Mr. Croft." Croft glanced at the cufflink, his eyes widening almost imperceptibly before his composure returned. "I have no idea what you're talking about. Now get out before I call the sheriff." "Call him." Jed challenged, his voice rising just enough to draw the attention of the nearby shoppers. "Perhaps you could ask him to authenticate this." Or perhaps Jed's voice became steel. "You could show us its match. A man of your meticulous grooming surely wouldn't wear just one cufflink. Where is the other one?" "Mr. Croft, is it on the wrist of the suit you were wearing 2 nights ago? The one with the torn thread on the sleeve?" Croft was trapped. His eyes darted around the store, seeing the curious faces of his customers, turning towards the unfolding drama. He was a man who lived and breathed his public image, and Jedediah was tearing it apart in front of the whole town. "This is absurd," Croft snarled, but the sweat beading on his forehead betrayed his panic. It was then that Clara spoke, her voice trembling, but clear, amplified by the sudden silence in the store. "You pushed me," she said, looking directly at Croft. "You grabbed my arm and you pushed me. You did this to my leg." Croft lunged, not at Clara, but at Jed. "You will pay for this, Stone." He roared, his mask of civility completely shattered. But Jed was ready. He caught Croft's wrist in a grip of iron, stopping him cold. At that exact moment, the bell on the door jingled again. Sheriff Brody burst in, his face red and flustered. "What's going on in here, Croft? Are you all right?" "Arrest this man," Sheriff Croft screamed, struggling in Jed's grip. "Arrest him for assault and for harassing my employee." He gestured wildly towards Clara. But Brody wasn't looking at Jed. His eyes were fixed on Clara and then on the cufflink on the counter. A strange, panicked expression crossed his face. He seemed to cornered as Croft. "Sheriff Jed," said, his voice cutting through the chaos. "It's over. Tell them. Tell them why you couldn't investigate my claim. Tell them why you've been protecting him." Brody looked from Croft's furious face to Jed's unyielding one, and then to the faces of the townspeople who were now all silent, rapt witnesses. The weight of it all seemed to crush him. His shoulders slumped. And then came the twist that no one, not even Jedediah, could have anticipated. He He's been blackmailing me. Brody stammered, his voice barely a whisper. The confession hung in the air, stunning the entire room into absolute silence. What? Croft yelled, his face a picture of disbelief and rage. Brody, you fool, shut your mouth. But the dam had broken. Years ago, Brody continued, his voice shaking, his gaze distant. Before I was sheriff, I was in a poker game. I lost everything. I owed a lot of money to the wrong people. I was desperate. I skimmed some money from the freight office where I worked. Just once. I paid it back later, but Silas, he found out. He had the bookkeeper's ledger. He's held it over my head ever since. He helped me become sheriff. He owned me. He told me to ignore your complaint, Stone. He said the girl had become troublesome and he had to put her in her place. He said if I didn't make it go away, he'd release the ledger and I'd be ruined. I'd lose everything. The store was silent as a tomb. Silas Croft, the untouchable merchant king, stood exposed, not just as a violent abuser, but as a blackmailer. Sheriff Brody, the symbol of the law, stood revealed as a compromised, broken man. The foundation of power in Redemption Gulch had just crumbled into dust. The stunning confession sucked the air from the mercantile. The townspeople, moments before customers, now stood as a silent jury, their faces etched with shock and disgust. Silas Croft, a man who had draped himself in an aura of untouchable authority, looked suddenly small and exposed. His power, built on a foundation of secrets and fear, had been demolished by the rambling, desperate words of his own puppet. "You fool," Croft breathed the words, dripping with a venom reserved for total betrayal. He stared at Sheriff Brody, not with anger, but with the cold hatred of a master whose most loyal dog had just savaged his hand. Jedediah released Croft's wrist. The fight had drained from the merchant, replaced by a brittle panic. Jed turned his gaze to Sheriff Brody, his expression, not of triumph, but of weary finality. "The ledger, Tom. Where is it?" "In the safe," Brody mumbled, his eyes fixed on the floorboards, unable to meet the condemning stares of his community. "In his office, behind the painting of the mountains." It was the final piece of the puzzle, the physical proof of the rot that had festered at the heart of Redemption Gulch. "Then, let's go," Jed stated, his voice calm but unbreakable. He looked toward two grim-faced ranchers who had been witnessing the entire scene. "I'd be obliged if you'd come along, to see that things are done right." The men nodded, their faces set like stone. The procession that moved from the mercantile was a surreal spectacle. Jedediah led the way, with Clara May now walking steadfastly by his side, her fear replaced by a fragile, hard-won resolve. Behind them stumbled Silas Croft, his fine suit a mockery of his fallen status. He was followed by the two ranchers, a living guard of public opinion, and finally, the shuffling, utterly defeated figure of Sheriff Thomas Brody. The town watched them pass in a profound silence, bearing witness to the public dismantling of their corrupt leadership. They entered the sheriff's office, the very room where Jed's quest had been so arrogantly dismissed. The air inside felt heavy, charged with imminent justice. Brody, moving like a man in a dream, walked to the bland painting, lifted it from its hook, and revealed the black iron door of a small safe. His hands trembled as he worked the combination, the clicks of the dial unnaturally loud in the tense silence. The heavy door swung open. Inside lay the leather-bound ledger. Brody placed it on his desk, the symbol of his long-held shame, and opened it for all to see. The neat columns of figures were a quiet testament to years of blackmail and compromised law. Jed then laid his own evidence on the desk beside the ledger. First, the ornate silver cufflink with its onyx sal. Then the tiny dark thread he had carefully plucked from the crate. "Assault, Mr. Croft," Jed said, his voice level, "and intimidation of a witness. A young man named Billy Pritchard sends his regards. He's safe at my ranch and ready to testify. Seeing the open ledger and the damning physical evidence, Croft knew he was cornered. The last of his composure shattered. "You have no authority here, Stone," he snarled, a final desperate roar from a dethroned king. "You're right," Jed agreed calmly. "I don't." He turned his unwavering gaze to Brody. "But you do. For now you are still the sheriff of this county. You can go down with him, or you can do the job you swore an oath to do. It's your choice, Tom." Brody looked from the ledger that had imprisoned him to the man who had been his jailer. He looked at Clara, whose quiet strength seemed to offer not condemnation, but a chance at redemption. In that moment, something shifted in the broken lawman. A spark of the man he was supposed to be finally ignited. He reached into his desk drawer and produced a set of iron handcuffs. The metallic clatter echoed through the office as he placed them on the desk. He walked slowly around to face the stunned Silas Croft. Silas Croft Brody announced, his voice shaking but clear and resolute. "I am placing you under arrest for the assault of Miss Clara May." He grabbed Croft's wrists and snapped the cuffs on. The sharp metallic click was a sound of finality, the sound of a long overdue justice. It was the sound of the sheriff's office finally being shaken to its core and set right. As one of the ranchers led the cuffed and sputtering Croft toward a holding cell, Brody sank into his chair, the weight of his years of compromise crushing him. "I'll write my resignation," he said to Jed. "I'll face what's coming." Jedediah gave a single slow nod. His work was done. He turned and walked out of the office with Clara emerging into the late afternoon sun. A golden light was washing over Redemption Gulch, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like a new dawn. Thank you for joining us on this journey back to the Old West, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred by dust and power. The story of Jedediah Stone and Clara May is a powerful reminder that true strength doesn't always come from the barrel of a gun. Sometimes the greatest courage is found in quiet observation, in the refusal to accept injustice, and in the strength to speak the truth, even when your voice shakes. It shows that one person's determination can indeed shake the corrupt foundations of an entire community and bring about a new day. If this story of quiet courage and dramatic twists resonated with you, please take a moment to hit that like button and share it with others who appreciate a real tale of Western justice. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell so you won't miss our next story from the pages of history. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Who was the real hero of this story? Let us know. Until next time, stay vigilant.